Hello and welcome to a conversation on Daily Burn. I'm your host, Eric Miller, joined today by a great advocate and journalist from the Bucks County Beacon, Lela Casey. How you doing, Lela?
I'm pretty well. Nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks for taking some time to chat with me. I'm based in Bucks County, and I've been following Bucks County Beacon, um, and it's sort of an independent news source, subscriber funded. Obviously leans progressive, but reality tends to, right? And it's subscriber funded, no corporate sponsors, da da da, right? So I do want to give a lot of credit to I think Cyril's the guy who started that. BucksCountyBeacon.com. I'll probably mention it a couple of times here, but this is just as a framing. This is in we're in Bucks County, which is Pennsylvania District 1, PO1, Fitzpatrick, right? And I've seen some of your work on video and in writing on Bucks County Beacon about the Central Bucks School Board sort of frontline fight against Moms for Liberty, and that's why I wanted to have you on and tell that story. And pardon my long preface here, but the purpose of this is also not just in our district. You or I are in different school districts, but this is a fight. This is a frontline happening all over the country, right? And talk about if you would, I'll toss to you here. Talk about how Central Bucks has gotten a bit of the sort of hyper focus nationally on this issue. Talk about, the front line that you're on.
Well, I would say the really pivotal moment for us, as well as a lot of communities, was COVID. The sort of safety protocols, following CDC advice, it just wasn't really happening in our district. And a lot of people, who, myself included, who hadn't been very involved, suddenly started to get nervous. Like, our kids are going to school without masks. They're keeping schools open when they shouldn't really be open. And, we had all these questions about what was going on. There was just one moment that's sort of been like this galvanizing moment, I would say. There were a group of women, brown women doctors, who had a press conference, and really they held it right outside of the school board building, and just talked about how we weren't following CDC protocol and how important this was. And then our little group of, the speakers and the audience was just like hijacked by this group of people that just came rushing in, and they started to yell illegal aliens, Nazis. I mean, they were just yelling at these speakers, these women. It was so, I think about it now and I still get emotional. It was a really disturbing moment for all of us. And we were kind of like trauma bound from that moment. And also just like seeing what we were up against. Like, this isn't just COVID. It's not just safety. It's peeling back the veneer. And there's this like really, deeper kind of a rot in there that we were not fully aware existed. My daughter was with me at the press conference. She was about 11. And there were like women that were getting up in her face. One woman in particular shoving her camera in her face and saying, tell us no kids have died from COVID. Just this really aggressive moment. And it shook us. And we realized, wow, like this isn't just about school board. Like, there's a force here that we're not really understanding. And so that's the moment that I got really involved in. And I would say for a lot of us, that's when we were really like, okay, that we're fighting, something that's pretty big. So a man stepped in, which I'm sure you've heard his name many times, Paul Martino, a multimillionaire investor who lives in my community. And he saw this as a moment to, as he said, collect assets. He did this whole New York Times podcast, I believe, where he was talking about how he used that moment to, find supporters, because there were people with legitimate concerns about schools being closed. No question. That was a legitimate fear and a legitimate concern, especially in like lower income communities where like, what are these kids going to do all day? It was very difficult. And so he kind of capitalized on that moment where people were feeling vulnerable and scared. We were all scared. And he's kind of like, well, I've got the answer, this is the way to go. Mm-hmm. And so he started to build this network of support, and they weren't called Moms for Liberty then. I don't remember what they were called, Reopen Bucks or something maybe. But it's kind of been the same group of people who, their name changes. their alliances do change a little bit, but essentially it's been the same sort of core group that has since evolved into Moms for Liberty. And then even more recently, a lot of them who were Moms for Liberty are now saying, well, we're not really Moms for Liberty, but they are still. I mean, they're still aligned. They're still sharing all their posts. They're still going to the convention, just
Right.
because Moms for Liberty has gotten a lot of bad press.
Right. So this is the origin of this organization. It's Moms for Liberty, and that we're only talking 2 years, and they're in basically every state at this point, 40 plus states and 250 plus chapters. This is a national organization, fighting this, I think wrong fight. Some you do too,
Yes.
right? What is their, what would you say is their mission statement for those that don't know?
Right. Well, I mean, to be clear, I don't think that was the origin of Moms for Liberty across the country. I think they originated in Florida. I'm not positive, but they'd all sort of combined. And now as you said, there are branches all over the country. So, they're saying that they're looking out for kids. They want parents to have more control. But I mean, what says it all to me? Like, this is just what they're really pushing is, book bans, taking down the pride flags. Two of our school board directors who did win in the last election were Moms for Liberty coming in. Now they're like, well, we are. Nobody really knows anymore, but they're certainly aligned with their ideals. And they're the ones that have pushed, the book bans and the taking down the pride flags. Now going after trans athletes, just this sort of, right-wing Christian nationalist agenda. But what really it's just one little moment, but it really hit for me. So there's Paul Martino, as I mentioned, he's kind of been the one that's sort of, gathered these folks around here. And he's really, really, really upset that Moms for Liberty has gotten such a bad name. I mean, he keeps saying over and over again, like, it's not fair. Moms for Liberty, there are good people, they're bad, it's not fair. But okay, so this moment really, their national site, somebody made a graphic that was kind of mocking them, and they loved it. And this is what the graphic is of. It's of a mother bear and a baby bear, and they're wearing Moms for Liberty shirts, and they're covered in blood, and they're surrounded by LGBTQ kids who are dead. And they have said, yeah, this is us. Yeah. And they shared it. And that to me is like, this is their national organization. This is the headquarters. And this is how they want to be seen. They're protecting their kids against LGBTQ kids. It's so, they get people so riled up. Like, this is this life or death, and they're coming for your children, and they're going to hurt your kids. And really what it's doing is sowing division, creating issues where there's not issues, and creating this aggression in our community and fear. And it's really, as you said, it's across the country, but Bucks County is such a pivotal place that they're really targeting us a lot.
Right. Yeah. And it's, before we jumped on the air, I was saying to you, just the Orwellian nature that they're fighting for rights by taking away the rights of, basically those that they're trying to vanish, right? The trans, the LGBTQ, and whitewashing history, the whole gamut, Mouse, one of the stories about this that probably got a lot of national traction was the book ban around the graphic novel Mouse, Art Spiegelman's, right? And there's, the Lupita Nyong'o's book about colorism and so forth, right? The examples of books that are banned, in the name of rights is just ludicrous. I mean, what's the most egregious example that you can think of that where you're like, what the hell?
Oh, there's a lot. I think there's so much to say here. First of all, one of their policies was that, the classroom has to be neutral. And that's where they took down the pride flags. But part of that also is they took down a quote by Elie Wiesel, who's a Holocaust survivor and, really famous author. And the quote was like, neutrality is the tool of the oppressor, or something like that. So they take down this quote by a Holocaust survivor. They did eventually put it up after there was a big outcry, but that was pretty terrible. The other thing is, these book bans, there's two sides to them. So on one side, there are the actual books that are removed. So in CBSD, they've removed two books, Genderqueer and This Book is Gay. I think those are the two that they've removed. All the books on the list, almost all of them, are either, LGBTQ related or issues of race.
Right.
Obviously, that's what they're going after. But the thing that they'll do is it's not just, okay, so 2 books out of, how many books in the library? Okay, that's significant, but it's not this huge thing. But the bigger thing is this sort of shadow ban. So what happens is when they make these rules, they're so vague, and also our admin superintendent, there's a fear that the teachers are afraid, so they make
Right.
these vague rules, and the teachers are afraid that the books in their classroom, they're going to, that are not meeting the standards. They're afraid that there's going to be repercussions for them, and so the teachers themselves self-censor and remove a ton of books. So a lot of classroom books have been removed, library books have been removed, ones that are not officially banned, and yet, the effect is that they are banned anyway.
Yeah, it's chilling, right? Yeah, that's not dissimilar to the tactics used in sort of the anti-choice movement, right? That, to make it intentionally vague to give that chilling effect, like you say, right?
And
Yeah,
they
that's
moved.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you know what happened with Mr. Burgess in our school district.
No, tell the story.
So our district, unfortunately, is known for being rather vindictive, and if a teacher doesn't, kind of toe the line, they get shuffled around. Or so there's a really big thing that happened in our district is we have a middle school teacher who was helping an LGBTQ student, and the student felt like they weren't getting help from the admin, and so the student ended up wanting to make a report to the federal office of civil rights. So this teacher helped them get the information or whatever. So instead of the district being like, this kid has struggles, let's deal with, they ended up moving the teacher. First they suspended him with pay, essentially they fired him. And it just ballooned bigger and bigger because then there was an ACLU complaint about CBSD providing making a culture that wasn't safe for LGBTQ kids, and then that was filed with the OCR, and now there is a federal investigation of our district about providing a hostile environment for LGBTQ kids. And instead of addressing that this is a really real issue. I mean, I don't remember how many kids are on this report, but there's a lot of kids who are like, this is a real issue. And you can, even if you come to school board meetings, you can hear these kids talk and the pain in their voice.
Yeah.
Instead of addressing that, they've just gone after this teacher. And said like he's the problem. It's
Right.
it's so ridiculous and so counterintuitive. And our district has spent $1.4 million on a lawyer to try to prove that that they did no wrong. It's just, they're not addressing the problem. They're pushing blame, and they're trying to use these issues to campaign, essentially, is what they're doing for their new Moms for Liberty candidates.
Right. Yeah, before we get too far away from that, I do want to mention, obviously, Election Day is November 7th, and this is, we're talking about Central Bucks here. Again, I'm in Council Rock, but this is an issue that's happening in your school district, right? This is not something, compartmentalized, right? This is happening across the country, right? And, it's onerous, right? It's spreading like, this is only 2-3 years in, and there's, I can't imagine, I can't extrapolate to what a finish line might be, right? Like they're, if they're going to continually marginalize, these, smaller groups of kids, based on gender identity and so forth, right? Where does it end? I hate to use the slippery slope argument. It's not that, but, once they're in place, they're, like you said, the abstraction in the way they might write the bylaws or whatever is there deliberately, and how it gets applied is going to just expand, right? Yeah. So November 7th is the election. Let's talk about your districts. Who's on the slate November 7th? Do you just vote straight D? Is that the answer?
Yeah. I mean, I think generally in the times we're in, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So we have 5 seats up for election. It's basically you're voting for the CBSD Neighbors United candidates. Rick Herron, Heather Reynolds, Dana Foley, Karen Smith. I'm missing someone. Susan also. Yes, you're looking for the CBSD Neighbors United candidates, all the Democrats. What you're talking about is how it's Susan Gibson, how it's spreading. Our neighboring school district is called Penn Ridge. Penn Ridge is also in Bucks County. They are kind of like the next stage past where we are, so we can kind of look to them and see, well, what will happen if things get worse, and if
Ah,
our
yeah.
candidates lose. Penridge is the first district in the entire country to adopt a Vermilion curriculum. Vermilion is curriculum created by this man named Jordan Adams from Hillsdale College. It is America First. It's based on Trump's 1776 program. It is atrocious,
Mm.
atrocious. If you look at little excerpts from it, it is, you know, Christian nationalism. That's what it is. The parents have been fighting. The Penridge parents are working so hard to get this out of their school. I know that they've already signed the contract. So at this point, it's a done deal. We'll see what happens in their election, but they are even in more dire shape than we're in. So Penridge parents also, I know they know, but everyone has to show up in big numbers there as well.
Yeah. Let me ask you a little bit about their tactics, right? So you know, they, they frame it around parental rights, which is kind of a misnomer, right? You're not necessarily advocating for the rights of your child. You're advocating against the rights of another child, right? Again, it's Orwellian, right? Um, you know, uh, do you have any advice on how to overcome that, or thoughts? It's not dissimilar to, the fear mongering of right wing media and Trump and, Muslim ban and da da da, right?
Right.
Do you have any words of wisdom or advice that those of us that, want to spread this message about, what's happening here? How can we enlighten other people, to overcome those tactics of
Yeah.
fear?
I think what I think about all the time is that we're preparing our kids to be global citizens, to be part of a larger world, not to live, in Bucks County their whole lives. So when you teach, I mean, maybe they will, which is fine as well, but they still need to be good citizens here, right? And so when you're teaching them this very narrow, very um, limited view of the world, and like the only people you need to respect are people like you. And it is so damaging. It's damaging not just to our greater society, of course, but it's damaging to them as individuals. It really limits them and what they can do. Um, so exactly what you said, we're seeing like the for instance, the book ban. There was always a rule in place in most schools, in our district for sure, where if you don't want your child to read a certain book, you can tell the librarian, no, these books are off limits to my child. It's fine, but it's this idea that they want to be in charge. And so it's this real irony of like moms for liberty, whereas what they're actually promoting is liberty for what they want. Like they basically want to make the rules for
Right.
all of our kids. Unfortunately, it's very hard to combat because, people particularly who watch like Fox News or those other far right sort of channels, they're just really almost brainwashed at this point. Like they're just hearing these same messages over and over and over again. So I think people who are really mired in there, it's almost impossible at this point.
Yeah.
There are people in the middle. There are independents. I've been doing a lot of door knocking and talking to people. Um, and those folks, I would say by and large, the thing that they're most concerned about is the chaos and how things are just, we've always had a Republican majority in our district, but it's not been like this. It's not been these extreme Republicans. So I
Right.
found just pointing out the difference to people like, okay, like think about how things have been all along and how they are now. What's the difference? What's the difference? What are you seeing? And the difference is the extremists, these extreme far right candidates. And I think that's our best bet when you're trying to talk to people, just to show them, most of us can agree on most things. But then when you get these people that are pulling things so far to the right, it's disruptive to everybody, to everybody.
Yeah, it moves the Overton window of what the possibility is, right? Just by default, right? Yeah, it might give us hope. I hadn't thought of this before, but the targets of this oppression, obviously the impacts would be, it could increase rates of suicidality and so forth, right? All that stuff, right? We understand that, but generationally, as a species, we progress, right? So, anecdotally, when I was in high school, there were not a lot of kids that were out, right? And I see the generations behind me more and more acceptance, and just anecdotally, right? You can't stop progress, right? So these are like those white parents that were, trying to prevent the I can't remember her name, Ruby,
Oh,
the
right,
yeah,
right,
right. This is like a lurch of, it's like a last ditch effort of, white Christo nationalism, right? And, maybe there's some optimism in these kids. They know better, right? Their only source of information isn't necessarily the library, right? They're living in a more globally connected world, to your point, far beyond, what we experience just at the library, right? So while this is a front line and it sucks, right? And
Yeah.
it's authoritarian and fascist, right? It's not, thankfully, it's not the only outlet these kids have to experience the world.
Yes.
Um, have you talked to, I hate to say the targets of this, but they are the targets of this. Have you talked to the students? Like, what is their general consensus or feeling about, them trying to be controlled?
Right. Um, most of the students I've heard are students who come to school board meetings and talk about what's going on. So these are the kids who are directly affected. Most of them have been LGBTQ kids or kids who are, not Christian or not white, and it's heartbreaking to hear them talk. In fact, our superintendent, right when he, towards the beginning of his term serving, he talked to us about how he gave a speech about how he did a listening tour and talked to a lot of students. And he said something like, when I talk to the LGBTQ kids, it was so upsetting, the kind of abuse they receive. And I had to just go in my car and just sit with that for a while. I'm paraphrasing, but what's interesting is when he came in, he was, sympathetic to these kids. And now he's really turned around and really kind of joined with these Moms for Liberty folks. In fact, they just gave him a 40% raise for sort of towing the line, the second wealthiest superintendent in the district. But so the kids I've heard of mostly been kids who are in pain. And it has been hard for them. What I will say, the hope in this for me is that all our kids are friends. Even the most far right folks are friends with the most far left folks' kids. And I would like to think we as adults are doing a pretty good job navigating that, even if we can't stand each other or don't align politically. We are letting our kids interact. And I think, honestly, they're all better for it. I think that they are some really solid, genuine friendships that I've seen with my own kids and kids on the right that makes you think that they'll all like they're talking and they're listening, something we as adults, I feel bad about it because my whole life I've been a bridge builder and someone who, who can find common ground with everybody. And I'm at the point where I'm like, there are some people, that I cannot speak to anymore. I don't feel like I can talk to them. I feel like what they have to say is dangerous and I won't listen anymore. But it's not like that for the kids. The kids are listening and they're talking and they're forming their own reality, which will be a much more beautiful one than ours, I hope.
Here, here. I hope so too. And
Yeah,
behind closed doors, the kids of the crazy right wingers are saying, "I'm so sorry about my mom." Like,
absolutely.
we generally don't agree with our parents a lot of times, right? There's a disconnect
Maybe
generation.
my kids are saying that too, if we're
Right?
going.
No, no, no. I'm sure not. Right? But again, it's the acceptance that that will win the day, right? I think this is a lurch, right? I mean, it is disheartening to see the rapidity of the growth of this. That's just, man, that is maddening, right? But you know, um,
It is, and this
it's
is a really big moment. This is a really, really big moment, I think, for all of us, because once they gain a foothold in your county, in your district, it is very difficult to shake them. So I think about this like just like I was saying, Vermilion. If we don't win this election, there's a really good chance we're going to have Vermilion in CBSD as well. And then
yes,
what? Like then what? Can I send my kid to school where they're being taught things like the people who were enslaved were liked it? Like I can't,
right.
how am I going to send my child to school with that kind of education? And so I just think that this is a moment. This is a very, very pivotal key moment where we all need to show up in big numbers and just push this extremism out of our schools.
Here, here. Yeah, that's so November 7th is the election around the country. So this is my sample ballot, right? So you're probably getting, anyone watching this, you're getting mailers about your local school board race. And don't just show up for the presidential election. That's one of the things, the right gets trained, to vote every time, right? Whereas the left tends to need motivation, right? I mean, make it a habit to vote, right? November 7th, it's critical. And Lela mentioned the candidates in her district, but find out the ones in your district and go to a school board meeting, right? Do you have any advice for anyone on the opposite side of the country that that might want to get into this fight?
Uh, right. I mean, I think You just show up. I think going to school board meetings, you'll this doesn't happen overnight. Is I mean, in our community, it did a little bit, but I think it kind of generally happens slowly, where you get one or two extremists, and you're like, well, most of our school board's okay. Things are mostly moving along well, and then before you know it, you've been taken over. So I think the key is to pay attention early. To go to school board meetings. I know we all have really busy lives. It's hard to do all the things. It's hard to show up everywhere. And if things are generally going smoothly, we tend to be like, well, that aspect of life is taken care of. But right now, districts across the country are vulnerable. Even if you think your district is safe, it's probably not completely. I think it's so important to vote, first of all, but second of all, just to organize, find like-minded families. My favorite part of all this is the community building that happened. And it happened, initially it was kind of strategically, we got to unite and fight this force together. But what's happened is I lived here for 10 years, but without having much of a community, just a few friends. And now I have the most beautiful, thriving, diverse community here, which I never, ever, ever thought. Like my thought was always, when my kids graduate, I'm leaving Bucks County. It's not diverse enough here. It's not, but I am so happy here. And it's because I've met all these other parents, all these other people, not all parents, who are really devoted and they care. And they're also just joyful. And it's hard, but it's also the best thing I've ever done.
Yeah, that's amazing. Another thing might be, to run for that seat,
That's it. I
like,
mean,
yeah,
absolutely. You have to be, it's an act of courage if you're living in a place like where we are, but it's not like that everywhere. But it is essential that we have people that are willing to do that. I'm so grateful for the people in our community who have run. And I will say, although it is scary and it is, you're putting yourself out there, just as I said, we've built this beautiful community. If you put yourself out there, the people will show up and they will surround you with love and they will be your support. And it'll be hard, but you'll have those people, boosting you along.
Here, here. So again, the elections are on November 7th. Can I ask you just kind of a fun thing? Man, I love Walter Masterson, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
He came to one of your meetings. What was, he sort of trolls people in real time. He's just absolutely amazing. If you don't know him, check him out. Walter Masterson. What was that? What was the response to that? The reaction to that? People know who he was, or?
I didn't know who he was. He's come twice. The first time I had no idea who he was. This guy shows up and he's talking. What is he talking? He's talking about penguins, and it took me and like, oh, I get it. And then like half the room is laughing, and the other half of the room is scowling. So that was pretty funny. They definitely a lot of the audience, enjoyed the joke.
Yeah.
And the second time he came, at that point, it was a lot more contentious because people knew who he was at that point.
Right.
And they were, I saw him in line behind me and they were, kind of giving him a hard time, but obviously he can take it. But he has, he's really helped spread awareness. I've seen him post a lot about our community because, again, Purple County, Purple State, Bucks County is a huge deal. And I think he's aware of that. And he's really helped share our message a lot. I've actually never had a conversation with him one-on-one, but I'm glad that he's, helped a lot to share our message.
Yeah, it definitely shines a light. And if anyone isn't familiar, if you ever like the Daily Show or that kind of humor or whatever, he sort of gets into these sort of high emotional things, and he basically presents himself as a pretty legitimate but absolutely ludicrous right winger, right? Saying the things that he's saying the quiet part out loud, and
But
there's
you know what?
barely satire to it, right? Yeah.
He's not even the most radical right winger in the room.
I know, right.
They're like, oh yeah, this is normal. He's talking just like us. My kids happened to be there. Two of my kids happened to be there the first time he came, and they knew who he was, and they were just laughing their heads up. And I'm like, what's going on? So
Yeah.
I think the young people know a lot more than us.
Yeah, here. Good words to sort of close on. I do just want to mention one more time, buckscountybeacon.com. And the good work that you guys are doing there, Cyril, yourself, there's a lot of independent writers, making a lot of content. It's not necessarily Bucks County only. There's, this is a, sort of a ground zero on some of these fights, but, you have articles about just, right-wing nationalism and, all these topics that can extrapolate to, anywhere around the country. And I commend all the work you guys are doing. It's absolutely amazing, that we have independent media like that. And go check them out, buckscountybeacon.com. And I'll say to you, good luck on November 7th. I don't know how that will turn out, but what would the next, I hate to speculate on it goes terribly wrong, what's the next fight?
It's really hard to look past November 7th at this point. It's such a big, daunting time. If hopefully we'll get the majority of seats. If we don't, it's going to be very difficult for a good amount of time. It'll be 2 years before there's another election. There is another every 10 years there's a census and they have to redistrict. So the judge has looked at some new maps to decide what the maps will be like going forward. And it's possible if the maps change, it won't be quite as daunting, but Democrats are in the minority, overall in Bucks County. So it's always going to be an uphill battle for us, however things are divided. So,
but this election could flip that school board, the number of seats that are up, right?
It could, because in the primary, just for instance, Rick Herring, who's the regional candidate in my region, he took 35% of the Republican vote in the primary, which bodes really well. The primary is traditionally much lower turnout, so those numbers could change, obviously, for the regular election. But if that holds, I mean, that's a great sign, because as I said before, this isn't really about Republican Democrat, it's about extreme right wing. And so I think a lot of Republicans are saying, like, we don't really want to go this far, like this is too much, we're jumping ship. One last thing is the signs, like, there's always sign wars around election, but this time it is an unprecedented level of disgustingness that the signs that they've put up have been just horrible personal smears and lies. And then they'll come down and then the new ones will go up, and I think that smacks of desperation. And I think it's also really showing the public this very ugly side, which they might have tried. Like, it's really obvious that they're extremists when you see these signs.
Right.
So I do think that that's actually gonna bite them in the butt, because most people are like, no, that's not what we want for our schools.
What other stories are you working on at Bucks County Beacon? Everything coming up you want to preview? I don't want to steal any thunder, but
so the next piece I have coming out, I've mostly been writing about the election, is actually just focused on that, on the campaign and all the like really underhanded kind of things that the right wing candidates have done, in this campaign season. Really unethical, and just kind of going through the list to remind people what we're up against.
Yeah. Well, Godspeed. Continue doing the good work you're doing. November 7th is the election. Central Bucks, wherever you are, get out and vote on November 7th. This is just one example of hundreds, right? Absolutely. That this is happening, right? Thousands probably, right? So, don't just vote on the presidential election. That is absolutely critical. Vote every time. Every time you can. It's and I just anecdotally, since I was talking to you, I decided to wear my LeVar Burton Read Band Books shirts, which I just got from MoveOn.org. So
I've been a super avid reader my whole life. I was a really, really shy kid, and books were like what got me through. Like, that was my thing. And so, I mean, first of all, I used to watch Reading Rainbow all the time, but these book bans have been especially painful for me to see, because I know how crucial books are for kids.
Yeah. And it's, to see, the difference of seeing yourself in a story or not seeing yourself in a story changes everything to a young mind.
Yes. And there's this other part. I actually wrote an article about this recently for the Beacon. Is like, even if someone is outwardly not, like, even right now where, there are these really far right people that I would not think I have anything in common with. But when you read a lot, you realize you do have things in common with people, even the people that you think that there's nothing there. It just develops your sense of empathy. You learn that people become certain ways because of things that happen to them. It just, I think, it's the bigger problem here is kids really just aren't reading. And this just, makes it even worse. But I think reading is such a crucial thing for building bridges and for empathy and for understanding each other. The fact that they're taking away, taking that tool away from us is just unconscionable.
Yeah, well said. Again, I thank you for your time. Thanks for all the work you're doing on this front. Good luck on
to all
November
the
7th. Yeah. Please come back, win, lose, or draw. Let's keep talking about this and spreading the word. I appreciate what you do and everything you guys do at Bucks County Beacon. So
Thank you. Thank you,
thank,
Eric. Good to
thank you
talk
so
to you.
much.
Have a good
Yeah,
night.
thank you.